Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to join us and learn a little bit about 360-degree surveys and specifically the multi-domain approach. My name is Stephanie Griffin. I am the admissions officer for the Executive MBA Program at RIT. Just so you know who you're seeing on your screen here, you'll see Dr. Mike Palanski up in the corner in the left-hand corner on his camera, and Marty Lawler, Program Director. I will introduce him in a minute, and he will give a little bit more context to today's topic. First thing I want to do is point out that if you have any questions during the session, please use the Q&A box on the left-hand side of your screen. We will try to get to the questions. If we can't get to it at the time, we do have some time at the end to make sure that we can get to questions and answers. Please note that this session is being recorded, and I will make the presentation available to you later on. At this time, I will turn it over to Marty Lawler, and he can talk a little bit more about the Fall Lunch Series and today's topic.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. I'd also like to welcome everybody to today's session. This is the first of 3 webinars in our fall webinar series. So every semester we start off with 3 webinars. And what we're trying to do when we run these webinars is we're trying to choose topics that are going to be of interest to both prospective executive MBA students as well as working professionals. So today we're launching with a 360-degree assessment webinar. One of the reasons we're doing this specific webinar was the result of a number of inquiries we've had from incoming students, and Mike will describe both the process and the value of this tool. We're going to follow this up in November with a webinar entitled Team Meltdowns and How to Avoid Them. This is really, what we're really going to be doing is hosting a discussion on the challenges of teams and with some examples of dysfunctional teams. And then the discussion will get into how can teams ensure more productive outcomes or more productive team projects. Finally, in December, we'll be reviewing our Executive MBA Capstone project, and we'll be doing that both from the perspective of students and the companies who submit those projects to us. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Since I can advance the slide. I'd like to introduce Mike Palanski. Mike is an assistant professor in management and a Zoots faculty fellow at the Saunders College of Business. In addition to a PhD in organization behavior and leadership, he holds a master's degree in theological studies and a BS in business economics. Mike's research and teaching are focused in the areas of OB, leadership, and ethics. And Mike's been especially active teaching leadership and leadership development courses in our Executive MBA program now for several years. The other refreshing thing that Mike brings to that is a very applied perspective to those classes. So Mike's done stints in both retail and online banking prior to becoming a professor. And so he brings a very broad context and perspective to this topic. At this point, Mike, I'm going to just pass it off to you, and we'll take questions later on in the session. Thanks.
Okay, well, thanks, Marty and Stephanie, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm really excited to share a little bit about 360 surveys in general with leadership development, but also how we do it here at the Saunders College. So I'm going to take the standpoint here that there may be some with us that are not at all familiar with what 360 surveys are. So we're going to kind of start with that, and then we'll move into how we do it a little bit differently here at the Saunders College. So let's start with very basic definitions here of simply what is feedback. And feedback is simply information that's provided to a person. Sometimes we call that person the target person, about his or her behavior and the results that stem from that behavior. And then this information is used to either continue desired behavior or to change undesired behavior. And finally, we take that information and use it to provide some insight into non-behavioral aspects of the person as well. So, for example, one of the things that we'll look at is how much are you as a leader trusted by those around you? So it's not specifically behavioral, but it is very important. All right, so there's feedback. What is 360 feedback? It's feedback from a survey that's used for leadership development. And you'll notice here on the slide that I've got the ship part in parentheses. And that's very intentional here because our leadership skills development program here is focused both on you as the leader, but also on the broader perspective of leadership, because leadership occurs within systems. It's not just about the person. So in a 360 survey, you answer questions about you, surprisingly, and invite others that know you well to answer those same set of questions. So we might ask your boss, or people that report to you, or your peers, coworkers, and then also sometimes we even talk to customers, internal customers or external customers. And you put all this together, it's very well-rounded, and hence the term 360 degrees. So how do we use 360 feedback? Well, we use it to make comparisons between how you see yourself and how others see you. So there's you, and we want to know how you see yourself, how your boss sees you, how your peers see you, how your direct reports see you. And we use that feedback then to identify some strengths and weaknesses and other areas for improvement. So let's say, for example, that you're reviewing the results from a particular leadership competency, such as creating and sharing a vision. If you rated yourself highly and others did as well, this is some good evidence that you have a strength that you're aware of and that other people are aware of. However, if you rated yourself high, but others rated you low, you probably have a weakness. And the real danger here is you're not aware of that weakness. And this is where effectiveness is really diminished. However, if you rated yourself low and other people rate you high, you have a strength that other people recognize, but you don't. So this would be a hidden strength. And this might be something that you can maximize or capitalize on. Something you're already doing well, but you just weren't aware of. And then that last possibility, we could say, however, is the low situation. You rate yourself low, others agree that you're low. It's a weakness, it's not something that you're good in. Then you have a decision to make. Is this something that you want to work on and actively develop, or is it something you just need to compensate for in some other way? No one's good at everything, and it would be foolish to try to become good at everything, but we still need to make sure different functions are being handled. So maybe this is something you pass off to someone else or otherwise deal with it. The goal here is to end up in that high category. You think you're strong, other people think you're strong. The next best situation is a low-high, where you have a hidden strength, followed by low. It's a weakness, but you're aware of it. Where you really get into trouble, and this is where we usually spend most of our time when we go through the 360s, is this high-low situation where you are overestimating yourself. That's where you have the real problems. And that's what we spend most of the time talking about. But on the bright side, people end up in that high-low, overrated type of situation. That means I always have a job, so it's not so bad. All right, let's move along here. So what do we do with all this information? Hopefully with some careful thought and some careful planning and some good coaching, we end up with this. We end up with a plan, a roadmap for improvement and development. That's the goal. But there's always a but, isn't there? Leadership just doesn't take place in the workplace, because the work is not the sum total of our lives, and it's certainly not the only place where leadership is needed, and it's not the only place where leadership is practiced. We also need leadership in other places. We need leadership in the home with our friends and our family. We need it in the community organization as well, so if we're volunteering. And that can take the whole range of volunteer community-based organizations. Could be a religious organization, could be volunteering to clean up a neighborhood or take care of a road. It could be running for a local government office. It could even be in education. It might even be in an online executive MBA program. Okay. All right. So leadership occurs in these various domains, and that's what leads us to our multi-domain approach. So we center our development here around this idea of multi-domain leadership. And it's based on the idea that leadership is practiced across these various domains and therefore ought to be developed in the same way. There are several advantages to doing it this way. The first one is this is very practical. This fits with how people are already living and leading. We're not asking you to go out and take on a giant developmental assignment overseas or something like that. What we're asking you to do is to leverage what you're already doing or thinking about doing to speed up your own development. It offers greater opportunity for developing in a couple of different ways. When we look at it from a multi-domain perspective, learning and practicing knowledge, skills, and abilities is sped up. There's research that shows that you need about 10,000 hours practicing in a particular skill in order to master it. So if we transfer that over to leadership skills, 10,000 hours, much easier to accomplish when you're doing it not only at work, but also when you're volunteering in a community organization or practicing with your friends and family, planning a kid's birthday party, leading your fantasy football team, whatever it might be. Another advantage here is that by looking at it from a multi-domain perspective, we expand the definition of leadership. Many people come with a definition of leadership of a command and control setup. I'm the leader, I tell you what to do, you do it, we're both happy. Leadership is much more than that, and by understanding how we practice it in different domains, we can expand that leadership, which leads us to the third goal here, which is both strengthening, making it deeper, and broadening, making it wider, one's identity as a leader. In other words, we want to take the role of leader and leadership and help to inculcate that into the core of how a person sees himself or herself. So you always have, to some extent, have your leadership hat on, and that speeds up that process even more. Okay, so how do we go about doing that? How do we go about collecting and analyzing 360 feedback across multiple domains? Well, one way would be simply do what we did before in the workplace, and then add on top of that some data from community organizations, your coworkers, your clients, and then maybe ask your friends, your family members, perhaps even your spouse or partner, which can lead to some really interesting conversations. We could go about doing it this way, but this wouldn't be good. This wouldn't be the best way to do it. And the reason for that is that leadership always occurs within a particular context. It always occurs with real people in real time and real situations. If we did it this way, where we're asking you to answer these questions based on a general leadership style that doesn't take into account those different domains, we're going to end up with data that's not as accurate. So what do we do instead? We actually look at those three different domains individually. So we would look at you in the workplace, ask you a bunch of questions. When you are at work, how do you lead? Answer with your work mindset. We do the same thing with your personal life, with friends and family. So when you're at home or with your friends, with your family, how do you lead? And then we would also do the same thing if you were volunteering in a community organization. When you're with that organization, what do you do? How do you lead? And so what we end up with is a more accurate picture of how you see yourself as a leader within each domain. It's very likely you don't lead the same across those three domains. And that's a really good thing because that opens the door for some more useful feedback and then also some further opportunities for development. So what we do then is to compare and contrast. So let's take a look at this slide. This is a little snippet of the 360 feedback report that you would receive in our program. So across the top we have the three different domains. We have work, community, friends, and family. Down the left side we have 2 out of the 14 different dimensions that we're looking at. In this case, be a role model and set a vision. And there's a series of questions that we ask that feed into these. So this is the 30,000-foot high-level overview. Now, in a traditional 360, what we would see is what we see over in that work column. You'd see your self-score. You'd see the average of all of your other raters. And then where we can, put in a benchmark score. And that benchmark is based on the average score of students that have gone through the program over the last few years. So it's a helpful tool to understand what these numbers really mean. And these are all on a scale of 1 to 5. So let's take a look at this with be a role model. You'll notice that within the work domain, you rate yourself a 4.33, others rate you a 2.14. So we're already in that overestimation category. So we definitely have something to talk about there. Where this 360 really helps those, we can go beyond that. We can look over at the community domain and realize, kind of the same things going on. You rated yourself a 5, others were just under 2. Again, overestimation. And we look over at friends and family, same thing, although not to as great of an extent. So what that tells us is across your life, you think you're a role model, but nobody else really does. And that's something we need to talk about. If we jump down to set a vision, we'll see somewhat of a different picture emerging with this. At work, a tendency to overestimate again. So this might be a habitual thing where you're not very aware of how you're coming across at work. So that's something we can take a look at. But look what happens in the community organization. You've actually underestimated yourself here. So you think, you're just okay at setting a vision. Other people think you're a little bit better than maybe you think so. Well, that's kind of interesting. With all this other stuff, there's this tendency to overestimate. Why on this one domain, in this one particular dimension, are you underestimating? That would spark potentially a very good introspection, a good conversation with your coach. And those are the types of things we're trying to draw out of the report to understand what's going on. All right. One of the other things that we can do with this 360, and this is kind of neat, it's not so much answering questions about your behavior, but it's understanding how you understand what leadership is, the meaning of leadership, and how other people do the same. So, for example, if you believe that leadership is about fostering collaboration, but the people that you work with think it's more about giving direction, especially the people on your team, there's a potential conflict there. When your direct reports are coming into your office and saying, I need help, I need some direction, you might think good, strong leadership is let them figure it out. Let's all think about it together. But if they're expecting you to give direction, that's going to create some problems. So understanding what the different mindsets are about what leadership really is can be helpful as well. All right, so what do we do with all of this 360 feedback? Similar to a traditional 360, the goal is to develop a development plan with some actionable goals. What's different, though, is that you're using insight that you gleaned from all 3 of these different domains, the work, the community, the friends and family. And we're thinking about the interplay between work and community, and work and friends and family, and community and friends and family. So we're getting a much richer picture of who you are and what you do as a leader. But the overall goal is still the same. Develop yourself. To create a development plan with some actionable goals that you can work on. So whether you decide to practice something at work or at home or in the community organization, or 2 of those or all 3, we now have a much broader base to be able to figure out what makes sense for you in that development plan. So far I've painted a rosy picture, right? This all sounds great. Well, unfortunately not always. People do have legitimate concerns about the 360 process. And if you've been involved in a 360 process at work, you may have run into one or more of these. So I'm going to put them up and we'll take a moment to talk through each of them. The first concern is that it's a waste of time. I have nothing to learn. I've done this before. I've been in the position a long time. Really, this is kind of wasting my time. Hang on if that's one of your concerns, because I'm going to get to a couple of stories that may address that in just a moment. Another concern, often from the raters, is that the feedback itself won't be confidential. Now, in any good 360, including ours, the names of the raters are never attached to the data. But depending on your size of or number of raters and what they say in open-ended comments, you could figure out or perhaps guess which data is coming from which person. So there is that concern. One of the nice things about our approach is we're doing this strictly for developmental purposes through your university program, as opposed to doing it in the workplace. So the people you ask to rate you have no incentive to give you inaccurate results, game the system, play one person off against another person. So we can kind of address that concern to some extent. And then finally, another big mistake is using feedback as part of assessment instead of as part of development. I've seen companies that have used 360 data and rolled it right into the annual performance review, which is a huge mistake. You don't want to do that. This is for developmental purposes only. It works best when you give this data and put it in the hands of the person and say, you do something with it. What you can do is to require somebody to use the data to create a development plan, hold them accountable to the development plan, but you don't want to do it directly to the 360. In our program and in most situations, you get a coach, and the coach is here to do two things. One is to help you understand what the results of the 360 are. And the second thing is to help you formulate a plan by asking some good questions, challenging hopefully, and bringing all of this into something that you can actually use. So I promised you two stories. Let me tell you about these quickly. Number one, I like to call the futility of doing it all yourself. A couple of years ago, we had a student in our program who was relatively high up in his organization, was at the C level, was actually in charge of a couple of different divisions within the manufacturing organization. Was known as the turnaround guy, was very good at coming in, diagnosing what was going wrong, and fixing it. He had a lot of success in doing that. And he was being groomed to be the CEO of the company. What he began to realize as we went through the 360 feedback was that the stuff that had brought him success, going in, diagnosing, taking charge, telling people what to do, was not going to work as he progressed up the ladder to the CEO. In other words, his development strategy was taking time to develop the leaders under him so that he could multiply and extend his own influence by developing other leaders. Second story, mistake of misplaced priorities. We had another student who was also a C-level executive. This person was well liked in the organization, did everything right, sought feedback, cast a great vision, was just really spot on in the organization. This person also had a large family and lots of kids. One of the things that this person realized in getting feedback from friends and family was he was neglecting his family in pursuit of growing the business. That was an important value to him, and the 360 was the thing that kind of said, hey, wait a second, you need to slow down, you need to pay attention to everything, not just work. So it can be helpful in that respect as well. And as we say in my hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that's it, Fort Pitt. So I'm going to turn it back over to Marty and Stephanie here to tell you a little bit more about the program, and then we'll have some time for a few questions.
Thank you, Mike. Actually, what we can do, we do have quite a few questions that came in, so let's take some time now, if you don't mind. And one of the questions that we got was, can you summarize the greatest benefit of the multi-domain 360?
Yeah, absolutely. The multi-domain 360 is really unique, and it's something that nobody else is doing the way that we do it. It's that ability to see your entire life and to leverage your developmental activities. So it's not focused just on the workplace, but you can be doing this, I was going to say 24/7. Hopefully it's closer to, 16/7 or 16/6. You do need to sleep, and you shouldn't be working on your development skills while you're sleeping.
Actually, kind of a follow-up question to that. Based on what you were talking about earlier with the high-low and the discrepancies and how people rate themselves, you've worked with a lot of
Mhm.
people and a lot of students. Do you find that there is often a discrepancy between how people rate themselves and how other people rate them?
There often is. Some people, it's very noticeable. It cuts across all the different dimensions that we look at, and it goes both ways. Some people overestimate themselves, some people underestimate themselves, and there are implications for both. Nearly everybody has at least one or two dimensions where there's some big discrepancies. Um, and even if there aren't, even if somebody is that rare person who's spot on and has a very accurate sense of how other people see him or her, then we can start looking more at the absolute level on a scale of 1 to 5 to identify development areas.
And that kind of answered the next question I had, which is, what's the next step if people find there is a discrepancy? And so it sounds like there's an individual plan that you work on with that person to work on that discrepancy in the high-low area.
Yeah, so what we do is, first of all, we try to flesh out what that discrepancy means, not just looking at numbers. The first place we go is we have a couple of open-ended questions at the end where the raters can put in verbatim what this person does well, what they need to improve on, what's their greatest strength, those types of things. So those can help. The other thing I encourage students to do, and many have done this, and it works really well, is to take some of these results and go back to your raters if you have that kind of trusting relationship and say, I didn't expect this. This was a surprise. Can you help me understand this? And I have so many people come back, in our follow-up and say, oh, as soon as I showed it to them, they're like, well, duh, yeah, look, and they start rattling off all these examples. It's really powerful. We take all of that type of fleshed out feedback and then help students to work on 3 goals that they choose to work on throughout the course of the program. So it's manageable, but yet it's substantial too.
We have time for one last question, and you've talked so far about the individual relationship and what they get out of the 360-degree process. Can you share any recent findings or research that has come out about the 360-degree process?
Yeah, actually we have some that we're working on right now based on data that we've collected from previous EMBA cohorts. And it actually has to do with trust. So we looked at how, trust and how people see themselves as a leader or not, whether they identify as a leader or not. In the workplace, when people see themselves as a leader and other people see them as a leader as well, trust is very high. When they overestimate themselves, I think I'm a leader, but other people don't, trust is pretty low. So it kind of plays out the way we would intuitively expect. Same people, when we go over to the friends and family, a much different picture emerges. As you would expect, if I see myself as a leader and other people do as well, there's high trust, just like in the workplace. But what was really surprising is if I don't see myself as a leader, but other people still do, they'll still trust me. Where trust dips down in the family and friends area is when there's kind of that middle ground. So if I kind of think I'm a leader and people kind of agree, they don't trust me as much. It's almost like if I'm a well-established leader, they trust me. If I'm not a leader at all, they trust me, which makes sense. They're my friends and family, so especially on the friend side, they have a choice to be there or not. It's when I'm trying to step up and do something new and take on a leadership mantle, or I had one and I'm trying to get rid of it, they're not sure what's going on, and so that trust is damaged for a period of time.
Thank you so much, Mike. I think that covered all of the questions we had. And on the next slide, you've provided your contact information so that if anyone has any questions, they can call you, they can reach out to you about this information, about the research you're doing. What I'll do real quickly to make sure that people can get out and get back to their lunchtime schedule, I'm just going to talk briefly about the Executive MBA program. The program has 2 delivery models. There is an online program that has 2 starts a year and an on-campus program that is here at the campus at RIT in Rochester. regardless of whether you're on campus or online, the program does start with an on-campus orientation for students. This is especially helpful for the online program. It's a cohort model. You work with these students throughout the entire program, and you get to meet with them, form face-to-face relationships, and work on your team bonding and team building while you're here. There is a week-long international trip that focuses on the culture of that country, doing business in that country, and that is taken in conjunction with courses on international business and finance, which is the next point here. Within the program, there is introduction to a breadth and depth of management courses, but there is an emphasis on global business and leadership, which is one of the reasons that this was a very useful process, because Mike is part of that staff within the leadership curriculum, and there are 5 courses on leadership or leadership development skills within the program. The next cohort begins in January of 2016. That's the online program. Applications for that are due December 1st. So if anyone has any questions, I will be emailing this information out to you afterwards, and we can get in touch and go from there. As I mentioned, I wanted to let people know that Dr. Palanski had offered his contact information, so feel free to reach out to him if you have any questions. I think that wraps it up for today. I want to thank you again, everyone, for joining. Hopefully we will see you at Team Meltdown session next month. Mike will also be presenting at that one, so you'll be able to see Mike again, and enjoy the rest of your day and have a great upcoming weekend.